on youth gambling. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the organizations that are making today possible for us to be together. Rye Youth Council and Rye Act. Rye Youth Council is a cornerstone of our community's commitment to young people. For over 60 years, it has supported the social, emotional, and mental health of youth through accessible programs and services. And today's conversation is exactly the kind of community investment that they were formed to facilitate. Lisa Dominici, our executive director, is here with us today online. And Rye Act, Rye Action for Children and Teens, was founded in 2014 by Nancy Pasquale, who's here with us today, and Julie Killian, both members of this very community who saw what was happening to young people and decided to act on it. In 12 years, they've grown into a nationally recognized organization around a shared commitment to preventing substance use and promoting healthy development in our youth. And this work, their work is a reminder of the most powerful, that the most powerful prevention happens not in any therapy office, but in the community that shows up together, as you all have today. And we appreciate that. So on behalf of Rye Youth Council and Rye Act, we welcome you and we thank you for being here. Now, to introduce our panelists, we have Monique Tricarico, a licensed mental health counselor and an underage gambling prevention coordinator at Student Assistance Services, a not-for-profit specializing in youth prevention and education. Monique works directly with students and families in schools across the county, sitting with young people at the intersection of mental health, substance use, and behavioral addiction every day. We have Anthony Palumbi, a licensed mental health counselor at M. Kim O'Connor and Associates, my practice, where he works with adolescents, adults, individuals, families. He's particularly skilled at meeting young people where they are and building the kind of trust that makes honest clinical work possible, especially with the clients who don't always choose to be in the room. He understands the pressures this generation is navigating from the inside out, and he brings to today's conversation a clear-eyed, practical perspective on what warning signs actually look like in real families and what it takes to help a young person find their way back to health. And we have Dr. Genevieve Weber, who's the director and associate professor in the counselor education graduate program at Hofstra University and a licensed mental health counselor, again, at my practice, where she serves as both a psychotherapist and a behavioral health evaluator. Genevieve has developed particular expertise in adolescent and young adult mental health, with addiction as a central clinical lens across her work. She conducts formal substance and behavioral health assessments for young people and their families, which means when we talk today about what it looks like to get help and what a proper evaluation involves, she can speak to that process from the inside. So now let's turn our attention to the topic at hand. I'd like to acknowledge that what has brought each of us here today is a shared recognition that what looks like play, what feels to our kids like fun and connection, and seems harmless, it can quietly become something that puts them at quite serious risk. Our goal is straightforward: to deepen your knowledge, to expand your resources, and to help you create a plan forward, a hopeful plan forward. So we're going to have a series of questions for our panelists, and we're going to wrap with a Q&A. So please feel free to put your questions and answers in the chat, and we will get to them at the end. So I'd like to start with those online first, and you can just quickly in chat answer the following question. When I say gambling, what do you think of? What's the first word that comes to mind? I'm not seeing anything in chat. Let's see. Uh, sports, casinos, money, addiction, risky, sports betting. Okay, online gambling. Great. Okay, now this is awesome. Okay, scratch offs. Yeah. Okay. And now I'm going to ask the same question of the panelists. And if panelists, if you could just go in chat all as well and put words that come to your mind. Poker, raffles, mental health, sports, unregulated, changing. Yeah. So this is where the intersection that we're going to be working in today is making this personal to raising our children. Monique, I'd like to start with you. When we talk about youth gambling today, what are we actually talking about? Many parents, as you see, cited sports and casinos. And what does it look like for a 10 to 12-year-old in their life versus a 22 to 26-year-old, let's say?
Great, thank you. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna assume everyone can hear me. Well, not hear you. I can help you. I'm saying that. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Great. So we talk about youth gambling and we start talking about 10 to 12-year-old. We're looking at their first, exposure in terms of video games, maybe blue boxes, and buying skins, arcade. And then we also start to think of things like as they get older, fundraisers, which is actually valid from a lot of different age groups, such as raffles and 50/50. And then as we get older, we see more sports betting. Oh wait, they can't hear. They can't hear. If I speak, okay, hold on, I'm gonna move this and see. Sorry, we're working off of a microphone. Can anyone hear now? No, it's not working. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
So I'm gonna unmute. Okay, I'll just unmute. I thought we were using it. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. I always say that no matter how much we use technology, there always could be a glitch. And I was the first one to go, so it was my glitch. Sorry about that. Thank you. So just to reiterate, when we talk about gambling, I always like to do this activity to understand that everyone comes from a different place when they think about gambling or thinks about something different. And then I define gambling. And we know the definition of gambling is betting something of value on a game of chance. And when we think about that, we really could think about so many ways that children are first introduced to gambling. We can start about video games, right? There's loot boxes and skins. When we think about arcades and going into arcade and spending money to win prizes or to win tickets or points to get prizes. And then there's fundraisers. Most of the kids, and one of the top ways we usually see adolescents and children engage in gambling is through fundraisers that schools or parents engage them in. So that could be 50/50s, raffles, things like that. As they get older, we see more sports betting, poker, and more recently, something called prediction markets. So prediction markets actually differ from gambling. According to prediction markets, they actually fall underneath a different law. So unlike mobile sports betting, which is 21, prediction markets is 18. And instead of betting against quote unquote the house, so for example, you go into a casino, if you lose, the odds are based off of the casino. The casino is the other end of the bet. Sports betting, prediction markets, you're betting against someone else. So the odds are how likely someone else also thinks this event is going to happen. And although prediction markets like to say they're much different than gambling, we know that the number one way people are gambling, even on prediction markets, is sports as well. And when I go into different schools and communities to talk about gambling, every school is a little bit different, whether they're saying that gambling is very prevalent in their school or whether it's not. But one thing we know is that the exposure to gambling in New York State is very high. So when New York State legalized gambling in 2021, that's when we started to have some initial data. So a lot of the data from the state and some of the data I have from Westchester County is from 2022. So right after we legalized sports gambling. And so what we saw is that for Westchester County, that our students here in Westchester actually gambled more than the state average. And I have data from another suburban community like Rye, where sports betting actually was the third top way they gambled, twice the amount of the state average, with bingos and fundraisers being the top way they gambled, and the second way that they indicated gambling was through betting on, like, are you going to make that basket on sports between themselves, which is really common, especially with younger kids. I'll bet you $1, I'll bet you my cookie, something like that, that they're going to be able to accomplish something. Then now we know what we know about gambling, what we know about addiction is increased access and increased exposure leads to more use, and leads to bigger problems. And with the legalization and commercialization of mobile sports betting, we're seeing a lot of exposure for adolescents. So whether parents are seeing it in their home or schools are seeing it, we know that all children are being exposed, especially if they're watching sports or even going to a sporting event. So it's really important that we have this information. I also have another study that was done more recently over in Connecticut, which isn't far from here. And what they were able to see from their data for high school students is that although substance use is going down, right, rates of substance use, gambling has risen by 60% in their under 18 population, and that the perception of risk of gambling has gone down. So their perception of risk, so their peer perception and their parent perception of risk. So again, this is kind of the perfect storm with access, right, to gambling through your phone, with the amount of advertisements we're seeing, and then this idea that people aren't just privy, they think it's okay, and the normalization of gambling.
Thank you. I think that that's a shocking statistic, right? That it's increased 60% under 18 and not being perceived as a significant problem yet. Genevieve, I'd like to turn our attention to you, and want to ask you, why are people across the entire age range, 10 to 26, more vulnerable than adults? And for our more vulnerable children within that age range, how much more serious does it get?
Okay, thanks, Kim. Hear me okay? All right, very good. Just before I answer that very important question, I want to acknowledge just the list of attendees. I imagine we have parents, caregivers. I see we have some school counselors, and I see we have some counseling students, which excites us to know that you're in your training, you're interested in learning more about what we call an emerging addiction. So in direct response to Kim's question, so we're looking at ages today between 10 and 26, right? So big span, but incredibly important because we know that the brain development is happening during that time. Newer data is telling us that the brain is growing well into the mid-20s. And so really every year during that span of 16 years matters. If we're looking at sort of these patterns of use, the impact of environmental stimuli, when the brain is developing in such sensitive ways, when an individual, let's say a child, engages in activities that lead to the dopamine or those chemicals in our brain firing at higher rates, it could impact the actual development, right, of our connections. And what we could see happen then is as they move to be a little bit older, that those kinds of connections that have been developed require behaviors, that align with them that might be a little bit more developmental to the 14, 15-year-old. If it's looking at sort of that dopamine frenzy, if you will, it might be some seeking of impulsive behaviors. It might be seeking the use of other substances, right? So a more benign, if you will, loot box in the gaming, or the unidentified egg of, what is this 10-year-old going to get from when they wrap it? Is it going to be the one that they wanted, or are they going to ask for a second egg so they can get that surprise gift that they thought they were getting? Those kinds of patterns develop. But then when substances enter the picture, different kinds of opportunities for decision making around risks, when there are patterns and sort of chemistry formed, then we see them as being at higher risk. And we know the data that adolescents who engage in more excessive gambling, gaming, we see impulsivity, we see the likelihood of using substances. And if you look at the actual data, the bars are higher in who's drinking, who's using cannabis, who's using pills, and really even some of the harder drugs of cocaine, stimulants, heroin. When we get a little bit older, right, into emerging adulthood, 19, 20, 21, 22, different developmental period, different kinds of stressors. So if there's the foundation that might already be, I guess, correlated with more impulsive decision making, now when there's new introductions of experiences during that age, we see greater risk, right? We see perhaps more impairment. And so during that time, sort of in closing, that 10 to 26, there's a lot of development, brain development. There's a lot of behaviors forming. So early on, if there are these hooks around this gaming, this pursuit of this excitement, the anticipation of getting and sort of the rituals around the gaming, those continue. And when they enter the different phases, we see the risk and the impairment increasing all the way up until 26, 30. So every year during that development matters.
Thank you. Would anyone like to add to that? I would just say, with the intermittent, you spoke of hooks. And, that to me is the intermittent reinforcement that is hidden in plain sight, right? It's like when we are told, can I have another cookie? No. Can I have another cookie? No. Can I have another cookie? Yes. Right? You've just, I explained to parents, you have just been trained, right? Your child has trained you to say yes, and you've just trained a situation where that will always be an asked question, because 1 in 3 times, even 1 in 9 times, you're going to come through for them. And just how powerful that is. Anthony, I'd like to ask you about the warning signs. And how they might look different based on age, and walk us through what a parent of a middle schooler should be watching for versus a parent of a college age student. And how can parents discern the difference between a child who, may just, be occasionally, dabbling in this, and one who is developing a real problem?
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Yes. Okay, great. I think you're really looking at the same sort of criteria for both a young child, let's say 10 through high school aged, and a young adult as well. It's just the warning signs within those criteria are going to look quite different. And I think earlier in the chat, when we said, what do you think of when you think of gambling? Someone responded with the word hobby. And that one really stood out to me. I think a hobby is something that fits into our lives, whereas a habit or an emerging addiction is something we begin to build our lives around. And I think that'll become clear as I talk about these different criteria. So if we're talking about dysfunction, for example, for a 10-year-old, that would look like, oh, well, I forgot to do my homework, or I'm refusing to go to school because I'd rather stay at home and be on my iPad. There's a sort of positive avoidance. I'm avoiding school because I want something that I get when I'm home, rather than avoiding some sort of negative consequence in the school building. There's less engagement with the things they typically enjoy, be it extracurriculars, spending time with friends, engaging in familial relationships as well. So there's disruption there too. And then as they begin to grow, you see that same sort of dysfunction maybe in school, but it also begins to cross into perhaps dangerous behavior. So now, let's say gambling related behavior is linked with other risky behavior like drinking or smoking. And then in young adulthood, that dysfunction can look like it's a difficulty maintaining a job. It could look like a difficulty sort of managing one's finances and expenses. And it can even look like the sort of deviant sort of behavior of, well, I'm taking money from people close to me, or I'm lying or engaging in some sort of deceit to sort of satisfy an emerging addiction. So again, you're looking for dysfunction and disruption throughout that early childhood into young adult range, but that will begin to look quite different.
Thank you. Would anyone like to add to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of talk a little bit more too. One of the things that we had done this presentation already and doing it again. So one of the things I mentioned last time was not only using academics. So a lot of times we'll look at academics as a barometer to how well a child's doing, or even a young adult in college. And a lot of times we do have really high achieving students who can manage to engage in these activities, and it could be impacting other areas of their life. But their academics aren't being impacted. And we see the same thing with drugs and alcohol. We can have really high achieving kids who can, maybe drink and have alcohol or drugs impacting a lot of areas, but not the academic piece. So we just want to be mindful of that. And we also want to be mindful of when we're talking about adolescents, a lot of popular ways around gambling are illegal for adolescents, such as mobile sports betting, which is 21, Lotto, which is 18 and over. Although we see elements like we mentioned in gaming, we really do want to discourage adolescents from engaging in gambling because of the brain development, things like that. So we just wanted to kind of reiterate those points. And the example around hobbies, I love that. That was a really good analogy or way to kind of think about it as not just something, not just a hobby, but something that kind of takes over their life. And we really want to make sure that we're encouraging students to find really healthy ways, healthy things to do, and recognize that gambling is not a healthy thing. It's not just a hobby.
Yes, and when we're talking about gambling-like behaviors in childhood, we really are, as Genevieve mentioned already. I think once we're talking about certain aspects of gaming that sort of leverage a certain schedule of reinforcement, so things like loot boxes or drops or packs of cards or all these different things that players sort of build a virtual currency within the game, and then they could spend that currency to earn sort of a hopeful and random outcome. So that's what we're looking for, not necessarily looking for a young person to be gambling in the way that we might talk about gambling in adulthood.
Got it.
Yeah, I actually have told students and parents that Fortnite, and it's not as popular as it was. I think there are people that still play. 10 years ago when I started doing this work, Fortnite came out with this whole article how they hired addiction psychologists to help develop the game. And a lot of these games have hired addiction psychologists, neurologists, to understand the brain, understand how it works, and understanding how to get people to continue playing. And intermittent rewards is one, but the research out there shows that gaming can prime the brain for gambling addiction later on in life.
Genevieve, I'd like to ask you, how should a parent approach a conversation with a 12-year-old differently than maybe with an 18 or 22-year-old who's legally an adult? And what are things that we should and shouldn't necessarily, as parents, be saying in those first conversations?
Okay, so there's a big difference between a 12-year-old and an 18-year-old, right? And what they're able to hear, what they're able to process. And as a parent of three kids in between that age, I can see when eyes gloss over, right? So I know when I can continue and when I should stop. Having said that, I think being creative engagement is really important, right? What we want to try to avoid is the say no. If we align some of these gaming and gambling behaviors to substance use, we know that in the 1980s, the say no to drugs was one of the more unsuccessful programs and initiatives out there. And what that has taught us is it's not a bad idea to impart information, right? To share what you know, to show some vulnerability. So for the younger ages, right, it might be just a check-in. Hey, did you know about some of these gaming and these problems that are out there? And it might even be a conversation about the phone and this creative way of this phone is just such a fascinating piece of a machinery. And some of these games, and to Monique's point, that they're actually designing these games in ways to keep you playing. What do you think about that? Right? Really using that kind of a creative engagement for the 12 or 13-year-old to say, really, they also see your interest, right? To open up that conversation. Are you familiar? Have you seen some things? Even a friend wrote me this morning about this panel, and she said, it's so funny. My 9-year-old just told me he's so sick of seeing gambling FanDuel ads, a little 9-year-old, right? Engagement. Moving a little bit further as they get older, the education piece is really important. What we know now about alcohol and drug prevention is give information to that teenager. Share with them the impact on the brain. Share with them about how to delay, how to reduce, how to stay away from it. And that information, it really engages them in ways that works with them versus it being more of an authoritarian where they turn away. So the conversations definitely look different. Usually, less is more, a little bit younger, but still not engaging them. Let's not assume they know how we feel. And I think the open communication is really important, but that means that you as a parent, you as a counselor, you know the words, you have educated yourself so you can have, I think, a real, effective, informed conversation. And if it does get to a point where it's beyond what you're able to contribute to, that's when we really, I would recommend to invite some professionals to come in and help you out. And that's certainly not a deficit. It's a strength, power in numbers.
Thank you. Monique, this is perhaps the most difficult question. But it's the most important in some ways. This isn't something that most parents associate with gambling, but there's a real connection between gambling problems and suicide. Can you talk to us about that?
So many people are surprised to learn that gambling is the addiction most correlated with suicide. But I think the more important is the relationship between gambling and mental health. And 90% of people diagnosed with, over 90% of people diagnosed with a gambling disorder also have a mental health diagnosis. So we want to realize that, I think we've talked a little bit about this before, especially with adolescents, their brain developing, that people are using gambling as a way to cope because it does affect that reward system in the brain. It feels good, but this is not a healthy coping mechanism. And so we really want to emphasize that. And then the other way around is that people who are adolescents or young adults who are engaging in gambling and then are having this impact on their mental health. So they're feeling anxious, right? Because maybe they placed a big bet and they're worried they didn't really have the money for that bet, or they owe someone money, or they borrowed money, or they're not doing well in school, or even as simple as I'll share, they'll stay up late. And we know just even how sleep can impact an adolescent. Maybe they can't concentrate as much the next day. They don't do as well in the tests as they had hoped to do. They're irritable. So now they're not responding as well to their teachers, their parents, their siblings, their friends. There's just so much impact that gambling can have on a young person. And I think that's really important to remember, that really mental health can impact someone's gambling, but gambling can also impact someone's mental health as well. And all of those factors can increase them for a risk of suicide, although that's the extreme.
Thank you.
To
Yes.
add one thing there, I know when we talk about suicidality, especially with young people, we're frequently talking about hopelessness, helplessness, and worthlessness. And all three of those are so present here. Worthlessness, when it comes to gambling, is so sort of woven in with shame of, well, I put myself in a situation and I've made mistakes and there's great shame. And because of that shame, I feel as if I no longer have the worth that I once did. And then hopelessness, this will never get better. I've dug too deep a hole. And then helplessness, I can't help myself and there's no one that can help me. And I think especially with helplessness, there's so many resources in this space and we can help to connect people with those resources. And I think if they build just a little bit of flexibility there and beginning to see that they are not helpless, then you could start to chip away at that worthlessness and hopelessness too.
Yeah, something we didn't talk about as much this time is that idea of money, and that a lot of adolescents will say that they want to, gamble for money. And what we know is that there's research to show this money doesn't necessarily equate with happiness. After a certain income point, money is not related to happiness. And so thinking that this money is going to change their lives or make things better, and this is for adults too, that's not the case. And then that adds to that shame and that guilt, and why aren't things, going the way I wanted them to go? And really, again, recognizing that this isn't a healthy way to manage your challenges.
Thank you. Genevieve, if you have concerns about your child, what does a proper assessment involve, and what are you actually trying to understand?
Okay, thanks, Kim. It's a good question. And I think that some of the ideas mentioned up to this point around parental involvement, right? Early intervention within the family unit, right? Let's say that you implement some rules around time, gaming, maybe even you have some blocks put into the phone, right? You manage the money. You've tried, and the behaviors are worsening. I want to introduce a word, and that's impairment. When it comes to assessing, and this is what I teach, this is very much what I do in my clinical work. assessment takes so much into account, right? It's not just how often do you gamble and it's how is it impacting you, that impairment piece. So when we look at diagnosing, when we look at assessment, it's about the behavioral consequences. Of course, it's helpful. How much are you gambling? If it's substance use, how much are you using? But to really determine the seriousness of what we have in front of us, it's how is this impacting your life? We've heard from both Anthony and Monique. You might have more isolation, right? You might have, you could have academic decline. You could have vocational or employment, let's say you lose a job, relationships are strained. You start to see comorbidity. That's fancy for seeing depression, anxiety, some other mental health correlates that hold hands with worsening kinds of addictive behaviors. So an assessment is, let's really look at this holistically. Let's get to know what's happening here, because although what might be part, the main focus of the conversation is my son is gambling, it might be, well, your son is gambling because there's also some depressed mood and some other symptoms that maybe the gambling is being used as a coping mechanism, or maybe the gambling has caused some depression. And so that thorough assessment, that real detailed sort of multi-level conversation lets us understand the full picture. So we can then together, right, assuming you go to a professional, that you're looking and you're saying, yeah, this is problematic, and it's problematic in these ways, and this is our next move. I think that if you feel as though it is beyond your control within your family system, that kind of assessment is invaluable, because bringing in somebody who understands what signs we're looking for, how to creatively engage, right, the identified gambler or the identified gamer, right, then it's all right, collectively, let's come together and create our game plan, our treatment plan, right, our next steps to really engage parents, to educate, to create stronger supports, and to maybe implement some of these barriers to continue with the behaviors while increasing education and coping and new activities that replace the problematic behaviors. So assessment is really important. It's not something that happens in 10 or 15 minutes, but it really can give us that plan of action that could really lead to, I think, healthier well-being.
Thank you. Would anyone like to add to that?
I work more on the prevention intervention side, and I can say that talking with piggybacking on what Genevieve said, is that when we have a parent come in and they're concerned about a kid and they're like, well, what do you think? I can't know everything. You need to know about your kid, and if you're worried, I would recommend going to get an assessment just to kind of get a better picture. So I think that was really important what she said, and RIAC put together a list of resources. The resources, although the resources for someone who is struggling with gambling, it's also someplace parents can go to if they want help in terms of what they should do for their child, and connect to resources, have someone talk you through what you need to say, what you need to ask, things like that as well.
I'm glad you mentioned. I just want to jump in. We're speaking with a mother just recently, and I'd offered to come and see me for support. And she said that she was able to receive a lot of support from Gambling Anonymous for her son. And she said it was a collective community, right, of support. So really that intervention can look like a lot of different things, but to really understand what you have before you is to really get that sort of that 10,000, if you will, foot view of all of it. That's what assessment is.
And when we spoke earlier about things not to say, I think if you're encouraging someone to seek an assessment, not starting with, I think you're addicted. And I see that happen quite frequently, and especially in young people, there is such a defensiveness. You don't understand, you don't know anything about the games that I play, therefore you cannot understand. And that's really what we're trained for, is that we don't immediately begin with, well, I heard there's a challenging behavior at home and I need to assess for it. It's multifaceted. It's holistic. And in that way, we can sort of go at our client's pace. And so I think whatever you can say that it makes someone most inclined to seek help is the best thing that you could do. I mean, even if you're pretty convinced what the presenting problem is, sort of leave that to the clinician and do what you can to get them in front of one.
Anthony, how does treatment differ across this age range? How are families involved?
Usually, the younger the client, the more involved the family. At the start, it'll look like building awareness and sort of from the parental point of view and the child's point of view, building awareness that something has emerged that's not quite right, that there's a pattern at home that is not working. If there's conflict every single time your gaming console is turned off, and that leads to cursing or that leads to escalation to the point where the police are involved. I mean, and you might hear that and think it's hyperbolic, but it's not. This happens fairly frequently. So recognizing that there's something that needs to change. And then for the young person, it'll look like building skills. How do I tolerate the sort of stress I experience when my gaming console suddenly turns off in the middle of a game that felt quite high stakes to me? And then for parents, how do I set and maintain boundaries and communicate those boundaries to my child? And that could be really difficult to do. And I think really validating for parents what they're up against, that I think parents can experience a lot of shame and think, well, how did we get to this place? And I mean, we talked about the sort of technology that these companies use to keep players engaged, and it's powerful. And I don't think it's ever a reflection of poor parenting. It's a reflection of some really, really powerful systems at play. And then the older the client, it starts with sort of identifying their willingness and insight into the need for change. I mean, one of my favorite models is just the stages of change model. Are you not even willing to think about the fact that there might be a problem? Are you willing to think about it, but you're not ready to change yet? Are you ready to prepare to change, but still not quite ready to change? And then are you actively taking steps to change? And then recognizing that there will be setbacks or relapses in this work too, that you might be able to go several weeks without placing a bet, and then sort of fall short of this new standard you've set for yourself. And then we come back and we grow and learn from there. So with young adults, I mean, sometimes the stakes feel higher, no pun intended. But in that way, the work can be very collaborative and rewarding both for the client and the therapist.
And I hear that also change isn't linear, right? It circles back on itself, and relapse is a natural part of progress.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. So hearing Anthony speak, this is something I don't think we mentioned in our first presentation, but it might require that, let's say the family's coming in and it's not unheard of as a counselor to have a family say, here's my child, please cure my child. And in that, it's, well, let's look really through that systems lens of how might what's happening with this, with this child be telling us a bit about how the system, right, the family can be working in healthier ways. And part of the treatment and part of the intervention, right, the next move would be to engage the full family. And that might mean that mom, dad, mom, whatever the context of makeup of the family is that there probably needs to be change within the system. That can come sometimes with a bit of ambivalence. And so as much as it might be, well, let's work with this child, it might require that the family also becomes more flexible in making some changes, maybe eating dinner together more often, right? Creating more family engagement during hours where the child might not be spending time with others and up in her room. So it can get complicated, but when the system comes together to make some changes, that's where we can see a lot of the prolonged change.
That's something that when in my work with families, I'll say there's many on-ramps. And, there are, when working with the system, change can come in remarkably subtle and ways and have ripple effects that are quite positive across the entire unit.
And I know that we earlier, right, we went to the next level, right? So we heard Anthony talk about the younger children and the family intervention. But as the individual gets older, right, we might be looking at a little bit different of an intervention. There are treatment centers. They could be outpatient. Some individuals might even go inpatient, right? If their gambling becomes so difficult that removing them from their environment for a certain period of time to provide right, that disconnection and provide that more restrictive environment for the sort of, if you will, withdrawing. There are instances where pretty significant gamblers feel withdrawal, just as the alcoholic or heroin addict with the shakes, with aches and pains, sweating. And so sometimes removing, or it might be that ongoing outpatient counseling that involves individual work or perhaps group work where there's a psychoeducation component. So that might be for that teenager in the 20s and of course, ongoing, that gambling disorder is now an actual diagnosis. In our DSM-5, which is a diagnostic statistical manual, that the big book of diagnoses, that was always squeezed at the end of a chapter of area for further discussion. But it is now an actual diagnosis, which speaks to the changing landscape, that gambling disorder aligns with substance use. And if I were to give you a summary of an example, and I substituted gambling with alcohol, the behaviors, the consequences, the assessment, it's very similar. So we're really talking about something serious here that can get serious, that requires an intervention that could require more intensive treatment. So we're really talking here about a spectrum, if you will, but at any point, that education, that intervention can really have lifelong, positive impacts.
This is a question for each of you. What is the most proactive thing a parent can do? If anyone is leaving this talk worried today about a child, what's the first concrete step you would offer as a possibility for them to take? Who would like to start?
I'll jump. I'll get it started. Be curious. Please do not be afraid to engage in conversation. Even if you feel vulnerable, you don't quite understand it, challenge yourself to learn, but don't assume your child knows how you feel, and try not to yourself sort of feel scared about the topic. Conversation and education is huge, transparency, because together then it helps you understand what next step to take. So please stay curious and be involved.
And I think just following up with that, one of the biggest questions I get from parents and even professionals about gambling or talking about gambling is, I just don't know everything about it, and gaming too. And that concept of being curious is important. You don't need to know everything. Ask questions, especially with adolescents. They love to answer questions and feel like they're knowledgeable about something. And it's a great way to build rapport and conversation with them and ask what you don't know. The one thing I do, recommend parents to be knowledgeable about is technology and how it works, and understanding safeguards the parent can put into place regarding the gaming systems and just access, kids have to their phone. We talked about how powerful the phone is, and all these devices, and really the power that the kids have when they have them. So that is one thing that's really important to know. And also to access resources that are available. I know I talked about some, and I know that RIAC put together a great little handout, and that has resources available also.
And I would just add, sort of model humility in your own efforts to curb habit forming behaviors. Like I think of Instagram, for example. I'm sure if I had Instagram on my phone right now and my daughter watched me scroll, she would say, well, you have a problem with this. And I would say, that's true. That's why I don't keep it on my phone. And when I do, I have to really actively try and make sure that I'm not misusing it or abusing it. And here are the steps that I take to try and make sure I don't do that. So trying to partner with them, I think often children will speak about their parents as if, well, the standards they set for me are, I can't attain them. And so why try? And that can come up a lot in this sort of work of, well, they want me to play for 45 minutes on the weekend. I can't do that. It's unrealistic. So talking to your child about what you think realistic expectations look like, being collaborative in that way. Certainly you could partner with someone else to help you do that. But it's really important that you do set an expectation that's realistic. Otherwise, as a parent, you end up frustrated and feeling helpless, and as if you've failed time and time again. And as the young person, you end up feeling the same way, just differently, helpless, and as if you're failing.
The thread that I'm hearing through that is leading with curiosity, which to me implies a desire to learn together. I hear that is implied in that is implicit in that is suspended judgment, collaboration, leading through role modeling, and collaborative dialogue, which is, at this age, adolescence and up, is how, how we learn, right? Is in dialogue with one another. So strengthening that dialogue is critical. I want to thank everyone for this discussion, and I want to open it to those who are here with us to ask questions. Lisa, you can unmute them. Or
do a thumbs up emoji, I can certainly try.
okay.
They can try to mute themselves, I'm just not sure.
Okay. Yeah, let us know if you have a question. You can put it in the chat or give us a thumbs up and we'll unmute you. And we want to hear from you. Can you give
Okay,
them?
I can,
Okay.
I'm a student of Dr. Weber's at Hofstra and with a long career in finance, but this is a new topic for me, but I really enjoyed hearing.
Patricia, we can't hear you.
Oh,
You,
oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why. That's interesting.
Oh, somebody's, you guys can get it. Someone has to put their sound on the computer. Yeah.
I can hear her just fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear her. That's weird.
Okay,
Patricia, we can hear
Sorry
you.
about that. I couldn't hear you, so I don't know why
can you hear me?
other
Yeah, I
people
mean,
can't hear.
I'm unmuted and my volume is up, so I'm
We've
not sure.
we've got you. It was our end. Go.
Okay, all right. No, I just wanted to say I'm a student at Hofstra with Dr. Weber. So this is all new to me. I had a career in finance, but I just appreciate all the comments. I mean, I kind of took a few notes, and I guess the curiosity part is so valuable to hear in so many ways in mental health counseling, in multiculturalism, which is a different topic. But I just want to say thank you all, and I appreciate all your work, the work you do in this space, because it seems another. I'm glad to hear substance abuse is coming down, but I'm sorry to see that we have another nut to crack with our young people and everybody else. I do know people personally who've been, quietly gambling. So this is all, I'm thinking, wow, they've been very subtle, or their spouses have. But it does seem to be a big issue. So thank you all. That's all. Just wanted to say that.
Thanks for joining us, Pat. Yeah. And Pat, you brought up an interesting point about the substance use piece, right? That we see that going down. And we also see that correlated with people spending more time on their own and on their phones. And we know there's no, gambling sites are just 10 inches away. So it's both great news and at the same time, oh goodness, this makes intervention a bit more complicated. Great point.
Thank you. And our complexity in our brains and
Emily,
development.
had I seen your hand up? Go ahead.
Actually had two questions. One is just one of those straight up parents who need more information kind of questions, and one on a little more on the scholarly side. So the first one was just about right, kids who are under 21 or under 18 for the prediction market websites. How easy is it for them to access to be doing sports betting? Is it just what like like on alcohol websites where you just have to check a little box that says this is my birthday and then they're on there and then they can do whatever they want? Or is there some extra level of check or control?
Monique. Oh,
Okay, I got it. Sorry. So I actually, for purposes of today, went on and finally gave in and downloaded an app. So the app says 18 and plus. So I did FanDuel. It's 18 and plus to download the app. That's what it says if you're looking at the age. But when I go into it, you have to like check off some boxes, like, accept these clauses. And one says that I'm 21 or over. It asks for my name, my address, and the last four of my social. So I actually did think it was a little bit more secure than that. I thought you had to show some like some ID that you had to put in there, but you don't. So that's all you need. I can tell you that although those are in place, most of the times when I go into a school, almost when I ask the question, do you know anyone who gambles on sports under the age? Every kid raises their hand. Everyone knows someone who's doing it. And sometimes parents know. I mean, it's not always done, like without and someone knowing. Sometimes they know it's the parent, it's an older sibling. And that's one of the reasons Governor Hochul has now, wants to put more things in place to make it a little bit more difficult. But I remind kids that you still have to pay taxes. So they don't realize, right? It's the reason they legalize it is taxes. So it's associated with someone. So if you win a lot of money, if you win anything, but if you win a lot, there's going to be a tax implication to that they might not be aware of. You're committing fraud because you're using someone else's information. They're geolocating. So that was one thing. I did have to allow it to locate me. So if you win big, they might come back and they might say, you were here, but the person who's registered was here. And that's actually what they're trying to do now with the new laws, is to know who the site's registered to and the person who makes the bet, and if it's physically feasible for them to be in those two places and within that time frame. And a long time ago, 10 years ago almost, this happened with a fantasy. Yahoo had a fantasy football and a 16-year-old won. Not fantasy, sorry, it was March Madness, I think. And he won. The odds of winning March Madness like in the trillions. And he had to give back the money because he was under 16. So listen, if you win a lot of money, they're going to make sure that it was legitimate. They don't want to give up any money.
That's really helpful to know. The other question that I had was in terms of these sort of like predictive risk factors, right? So like we know that with other, kind of risky behaviors like drinking, right? That many people are able to drink in a kind of, non-problematic, responsible way, and then some people aren't. And I mean, I'm a neuroscientist, so I'm really interested in the like sciencey side of this. Of like, do we know anything about risk factors for, especially this kind of sensitive young person age of like, obviously we know that like starting to do it can kind of put you more at risk, but even within that pool, like some kids are probably going to be fine and some kids really aren't. And are there any kind of indicators that might kind of clue us into like who's more at risk, who's less at risk?
I mean, so again, from a prevention standpoint, no use is the best, right? Like that's what we say. We really, especially when we talk about substance use with kids, because it's not only about addiction. We also know that engaging in these activities can also have its own risk, especially when we're talking about drugs and alcohol, but even gambling, right? You don't have to be addicted to see consequences. So I have to kind of just say that. But absolutely, I mean, adolescents themselves being a more vulnerable population, we talked a lot about having mental health is a more, makes them more vulnerable. So there definitely are lots of different risk factors that can make them. And we also remember some we know, but some we don't know. There are genetic components too. Something I don't think we said this time around, but last time, they are now looking into science that shows there are components of the brain that are passed down that can make gambling addictive. That there is science about that. So we really just kind of want to, be mindful of that. But yes, there are definitely kids that can be more vulnerable for lots of the same risk factors that we see for drugs and alcohol for gambling.
Thank you. Joe, you have a question? Can you unmute?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Oh, Joel.
Yeah, no problem. I was just wondering if the folks on this panel had looked into like problem behavior associated with cryptocurrency trading or like high volatility stock trading, because I think it is like somewhat similar, and I've kind of followed it for a while and seen just kind of like the dangers it can present on people's lives if trades go wrong. And I was just wondering if anybody could speak to that.
Sure. I wouldn't say that cryptocurrency comes up a lot necessarily in session, but I would say that prediction markets are often spoken about in that same sort of language, that young people will talk about prediction markets, where it's more like a skill that they could cultivate rather than true gambling, which I think we've tried to make the case that that's sort of a myth. But I do hear lots of teens and young adults speak about it that way. Like this is potentially a viable career path. Or if I can do enough research or spend enough time alone, and then maybe I could get very good at this. And then so it is sort of a fast track to gambling addiction. So I would say that's where I hear the sort of crypto adjacent language most frequently.
And with the
sorry.
prediction markets, isn't it 60% of the market right now of the prediction market is sports related?
Yep, 70%.
70%, yeah.
The current prediction market bets are on sports. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
So anytime I present, it comes up, right? Especially before even prediction markets was a thing, people brought up stocks. I speak to kids and I've spoken to people in recovery. And so, I'm like, I think it goes back to what constitutes being an issue, right? Even exercise too much can cause a problem for someone. So we want to look at why someone's engaging in something, how it's impacting their life. If a child is becoming obsessed with cryptocurrency and, maybe it's like, taking up all their time and impacting areas of their life, it could be a problem. If you have an adult who's in recovery from gambling and now has, morph that gambling addiction into something else where it's having the same impact on their lives as gambling did. Well, yeah, it might not be illegal. We might not consider addiction, but it can still be causing issues in their life. So I kind of think about it in that way.
So I'm mindful of time. We can stay on and continue to field questions, but I'm aware that many people will be hopping off. And so I want to, express gratitude to the panel. And gratitude to Rye Youth Council and Rye Act for hosting today and allowing us this opportunity. This is recorded, and I believe it's being shared with all participants. And there is a handout that we will be distributing to everyone. And please know that you can be in touch with us. We're here. It takes a community, right? And let's continue with our questions. Cynthia, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. First, I definitely want to thank you so much for this. This is wonderful. I'm a mother of 2 young adults, but I'm also a student at LIU in the mental health counseling program. And I just found this to be fascinating. I just finished reading a book by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation. And this is so connected here. I mean, it's amazing how much this is connected to what has been going on with our youth. And I guess my question is, I noticed in the book that certain aspects of social media and iPhones and what have you, iPhone usage was related to girls versus boys. Like girls were definitely more vulnerable to the social media aspect of, iPhones, and boys were more prone to things like porn or video games. And so I was just wondering, it seems to me from what I know, just from what my son has told me, that it's like his friends, that it's more of a male thing, this like gambling addiction. But I was just wondering if that's the case or is that not the case?
Sure about that.
Okay.
Hi, Cynthia. I'm glad to hear that you're at LIU. Mama Bird Hofstra teaching. So thank you for just committing to.
Oh, yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah. So you bring up the gender differences, and in our earlier session, we actually had a gambling expert in the audience, and she had shared that men start gambling earlier, women start gambling later, and they start gambling as a coping mechanism. And that could be for comorbidities around depression, anxiety, maybe just life transitions, motherhood, moving into. So that was an interesting change. I will speak to the pornography piece, right? You brought up something that is also an emerging addiction. And as a student and as a teacher, we're actually adding these emerging addictions to our curriculum. We even have a new course in fall. And part of it is pornography addiction. Something very interesting is that is impacting adolescent boys more. In that they are watching it, and some of them are developing problematic, pornography watching and also addiction, and it's also impacting the women because of the intimate the intimacy involved. So this is something I've had pretty detailed conversations with my students about, my women students, who say some of them are actually abstaining from relationships because the intimacy has changed so much that it's no longer enjoyable for them. So this is something that I've talked to my colleagues about, that this is something we're going to see continue to grow. And I think it's really going to be presented across from us in our counseling, both sides, right? The idea of how do we limit, right, and intervene with the pornography piece, that our young boys are able to develop healthier behaviors around intimacy, and also for the partners, right, who are coming in and saying, I'm abstaining because it's impacting what I want in a relationship. So I think you touched on something really important, and I myself am learning what I can as this landscape changes. Another emerging addiction.
Wow.
Just
Thank
to
you.
add to regarding the gambling with females, and so one thing we know about drugs and alcohol is that females start to have caught up to males in a lot of ways, what we've seen with the stats. And we don't have a lot of stats right now, but it would be interesting to see now, even compared to a few years from now. I would guess that we're going to see an increased rate with females. You know, right now it's so much around sports betting, but we're also seeing a bigger and greater interest in women's sports, which is amazing, but also why people theorize too, we're going to start to see an increase in females engaging in that, in it also. And again, just being so widespread and so prevalent. So it'll be interesting to see over the next few years what that happens. But in terms of affluent white male tend to be the most at-risk adolescent population right now for sports betting.
That's right.
And I would add that in that group, a deep knowledge of sports is such a sort of social capital for young boys to know how many players can you name on the team that you root for, the positions they play, where they went to college, all of their percentages. And now it's synonymous with sports is sports betting. So, well, can you identify the lines or the over under all of these different the different sort of elements of gambling? It's having a deep knowledge of that is viewed as just as sort of, it makes you just the same level of sort of expert, or just as masculine or in the know as some of your peers. So I do think that I've seen a rise in that, and it is likely part of why there's a rise in gambling related behavior.
I want to be respectful of time, and while we still have a couple of people on, if there's any last question, we're happy to take one more question. Anyone? What? Oh, Nancy. Oh, I didn't see Nancy's hand raised. Nancy,
I was
hop
trying,
on.
I was trying to do it through the hand raising. Can you all hear me? So I just wanted to add a quick something about the question that Emily, I think, brought up earlier. And for some of you who are Hofstra students who may have heard me present in one of your classes, thank you, Genevieve. The one thing about kids who are particularly at risk that or individuals who are particularly at risk, I want to just remind us all, and especially those of you who are emerging professionals, that all kids are at risk. By definition, if you have an adolescent brain, regardless of any other risk factor, you are at increased risk for addiction of any kind because of what is happening in that developing brain that makes you more vulnerable. And while it's important to know all sorts of risk factors, like if you're more prone to impulsive behavior, for example, if you have ADHD, if you already have a known mental health challenge, of course, your risk is elevated. Certain populations have elevated risk because they're targeted in particular ways. But I think it's really important. I just want to reinforce that if a person is an adolescent, if they have a developing brain, they are by definition at risk because their brain is working differently and hitting those dopamine pathways in ways that promote addiction or create addictive response is just way more sensitive. Those pathways are more sensitive as their brain is developing in ways that it will not be when they are 28 or 30 or 35.
Thank you, Nancy. Such a powerful point. Well, I want to thank everyone for staying on to extend the Q&A part of the presentation, and thank you for participating. And please watch for our video and our handout. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Nice to see everybody.
Thank you.